Israel's Supreme Court has opened hearings on a law to curb its powers in a case that could set the judiciary on a collision course with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's hardline government after months of mass protests over the controversial legislation. The court is hearing arguments for and against the first part of Netanyahu's Judicial Overhaul plan that has been passed in Parliament. It's a law that restricts the court's ability to nullify government actions that it deems unreasonable. Beyond the legal questions surrounding the law and the justices ruling on their own powers, remains the question of whether Netanyahu's government would even abide by a court ruling possibly months away if it comes, striking down this law. That would set Israel up for an unprecedented judicial and political crisis. Netanyahu has always claimed that he is in full control of this government, no matter who his ministers are. But the next few weeks could be critical to his own future. Netanyahu's proposals to weaken the courts have divided Israeli society, with critics describing them as a threat to the country's democracy. Tens of thousands of Israelis took to the streets once again outside the Supreme Court on Monday evening as part of the 36-week-long protest movement against the overhaul to show support for the judges ahead of the hearing. Some of the demonstrators later marched to the Prime Minister's official residence, in Jerusalem. The Supreme Court is hearing appeals against the so-called reasonableness law, the first aspect of the judicial overhaul that was passed by the Knesset in July, brought in by the Netanyahu government despite months of street protests, warning from the Biden administration and even a boycott by all opposition lawmakers of the final vote on the bill. The measure, which amended one of Israel's basic laws, came into effect just 2 days after it was passed in the Knesset, and it strips the Supreme Court of the power to strike down government decisions. It finds to be unreasonable. Now, like the United Kingdom, Israel does not have a written constitution. Instead, it relies on 13 basic laws and court ruling precedents that could one day become a constitution. That leaves the Supreme Court as the only check on the executive and legislative branches of the government. Striking down a basic law would be uncharted territory for the Supreme Court, although it has examined and commented on basic laws before. Many Israelis, both those for and against judicial changes, say Israel is risking tearing itself apart and that the judicial overhaul is just one aspect of what's really fueling the divide, the battle between the secular and the religious. The anti-judicial overhaul demonstrations are now the longest and largest protest movement in Israeli history. It started when Netanyahu came back to power late last year, leading the most right-wing and religious coalition ever to hold power in Israel. Though judicial reform was barely mentioned during Netanyahu's election campaign, it quickly became the main issue when Justice Minister Yariv Levin announced the sweeping plans days after being sworn in.